The jungle burned in the distance, sending black smoke into the pale green sky. Trees snapped, beasts screamed, and strange alien aircraft zipped overhead like angry insects. The human soldiers were retreating, running through thick roots, ancient vines. Only one stayed behind, Sergeant James Cole, pinned under a fallen tree, bleeding and coughing as fire closed in. He knew he wouldn't make it out. His radio was broken, his weapon jammed. The ground shook from something large approaching, but James didn't pray. He didn't beg. He just stared into the smoke and waited. That's when he saw her. Not a soldier, not a beast, but a girl, green skin, white hair, glowing eyes filled with fear. She was crawling toward him through the ash and mud. Thin chains clinked around her ankles, glowing faintly with alien symbols. She wasn't from his side. She wasn't even human. Yet she reached him with shaking hands and whispered one word in a soft, strange accent. Help. James couldn't move, but something in her eyes pushed him to try. Her fingers were cold as she touched his shoulder. She pressed a small vial into his hand, then collapsed beside him. He didn't know what the liquid was, but as the fire got closer, he drank it without thinking. His vision blurred. The pain in his chest vanished. His limbs tingled, then moved. Whatever she had given him, it healed him. Not fully, but enough to crawl. Enough to pull the tree off. Enough to save her. He threw her over his shoulder and limped toward the only direction that didn't burn. Hours passed. He didn't stop. She didn't wake. When night fell, he finally found a hollow under a rock ledge. There, surrounded by glowing moss and distant predator calls, he finally spoke. Who are you? Her eyes opened slowly. She didn't answer right away. Her lips trembled. She looked at him like she'd never seen a man before. Then, with a broken voice and no emotion, she said, I am property. I was a gift. You are not my master? James froze. He didn't understand. A gift? To who? And what did she mean by property? His world didn't work like that. But she said it again, softer this time, with confusion in her voice. I was a gift, human. Why haven't you touched me yet? His blood turned cold. It wasn't just the jungle's temperature. It was the way she said it, like she expected to be used, like she believed pain was normal. Her eyes didn't show fear when she said it, only surprise that he hadn't done it yet. James knelt beside her. No one owns you, he said, voice firm. You're free now. I'm not like them, she blinked. Her face slowly changed. Not with joy, not with hope, just more confusion. As if freedom was a concept too alien to understand. She wrapped her arms around her knees and stayed silent. Over the next few days, they stayed hidden in the jungle. He hunted small creatures. She showed him what plants to eat. She never smiled. She never laughed. But she watched him, closely, quietly, like she was studying a new species. James learned her name by accident. When he called her, hey, she looked down and whispered, Kayleen. He repeated it, and she looked shocked, as if no one had ever said it kindly before. They didn't talk much, but slowly, something changed. She started sitting closer to him. She started asking questions, small ones. Why do you cook meat? Or why don't you chain me at night? Simple things. But they told him a lot. One night, as the stars turned purple overhead, she asked something different. What is kindness? James didn't know how to explain it, so he showed her. He gave her his jacket when it rained. He fixed the wound on her ankle. He didn't touch her unless she gave permission. Slowly, she began to understand. But safety didn't last. A patrol drone flew overhead one morning. James destroyed it with a thrown rock and Kayleen's help. But the damage was done. Her former masters knew her location. And they were coming. James checked his rifle. Only one shot left. His boots were torn, his stomach empty. But he stood between her and the jungle path, ready. Kayleen didn't run. She stood beside him, trembling but determined. She reached out and grabbed his hand. Her voice barely a whisper. "I choose to stay with you," and for the first time, her eyes weren't empty. James didn't sleep that night. His hand stayed on his weapon. His eyes stayed on the shadows. Kayleen lay beside him, curled in his jacket like a child trying to hide from a storm. She didn't speak, but he could tell she felt it too, the silence of something hunting. By morning, the jungle felt colder. The sun rose late behind dark clouds. Birds didn't sing. Insects didn't buzz. Something had changed. James stepped outside the rock shelter and scanned the treetops. A faint shimmer flickered between the branches cloaking Tech. He turned back inside. "We have to move," he said. Kayleen didn't ask why. She stood, wrapped the jacket tighter, and followed him without question. Her movements were quicker now, not strong but alert. The healing vial had done more than mend his bones. It had bonded them in a strange way neither of them yet understood. They walked through wet undergrowth, avoiding open ground. Kayleen guided them toward the sound of falling water. James had no map, no signal, no backup, but he trusted her instinct. She moved like someone born in the roots of this world. By noon, they reached a hidden stream behind a thick wall of vines. Water rushed over mossy rocks. James drank first, then helped Kayleen. She hesitated at his hands, then leaned in. Their fingers touched. She didn't pull away. Suddenly, a sharp sound cracked through the air. Not thunder, not a beast. A pulse rifle shot. James pulled her down into the mud. A second shot hit the vines behind them, burning leaves into ash. He saw movement across the stream, 2 soldiers in black armor with glowing red eyes. James returned. Fire, 1 shot, 1 soldier down. The other vanished behind a tree. James cursed. "Only 1 bullet left," he muttered. Kayleen didn't look scared. She looked calm, like she'd faced worse. "I know a path," she said. "But I must ask you something first." James looked at her, breathing hard. "Now?" She nodded. "Why are you protecting me?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't know the answer, not fully. But he said the first thing that came to his heart. "Because you were never meant to be owned." Colleen stared at him like she'd just seen a new color. Then she turned and pushed aside the rocks behind the waterfall. A narrow tunnel opened, hidden by the sound of water. She crawled through first. James followed. Inside was a passage lit by glowing roots. It twisted down into the earth, cool and damp. Kayleen didn't speak again until they reached a wider chamber with old alien symbols carved into the walls. She lit a crystal in the center. Pale green light filled the room. "This place belonged to my ancestors," she whispered. "Before we were taken. Before we were gifts." James studied the walls. He saw carvings of her kind standing proud, strong, wearing armor not chains. Kayleen moved to a stone chest and opened it. Inside were old tools, vials, and a small dagger made of something that shimmered like ice. She offered the dagger to James. "It responds to truth," she said. "It burns liars. It heals the worthy. Take it." James didn't want to offend her. He took the dagger and held it. It glowed in his hand, warm and bright. Kayleen smiled for the first time. Not with her lips, but with her eyes. "Then you are worthy," she said before he could speak. A loud explosion shook the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling. Kayleen grabbed his arm. "They found the entrance," she said. "There's another way out, but it's not safe." James didn't care. "Let's go," he said. "We stick together." They ran through a lower tunnel, climbing over stones and fallen roots. Behind them, energy pulses lit up the dark. Voices shouted in an alien tongue. James covered Kayleen with his body more than once. She didn't complain. She only whispered one thing as they reached the exit. "If I die, thank you for treating me like a person." James looked at her and said, "You're not going to die." "Not while I'm still breathing." They burst out into sunlight. A field stretched ahead, full of strange red flowers. On the other side was an abandoned dropship, half buried in vines. Kayleen pointed. "It's from the first wave." "Maybe." "It still works." James ran toward it, dragging her behind him. Shots whizzed past their heads. One hit the ground near Kayleen's foot. She fell, crying out. James picked her up without slowing. The ship was close. Closer than death. He reached the hatch, kicked it open, and dragged her inside. Controls blinked weakly. He slammed his hand on the ignition. Nothing happened. Then, with a flicker, the console lit up. He looked down at Kayleen. Her leg was bleeding. Her hands trembled. She looked up at him, eyes wide with pain and hope. "You're going to fly us out?" she asked. James smiled. "Damn right I am," the engine screamed to. Life. The old dropship rattled as it lifted off the jungle floor. Vines tore loose from its hull. Leaves whipped across the windshield. The engines coughed, then steadied into a deep growl. James gripped the controls with both hands, teeth clenched. As he pulled the craft up through the trees, behind him, Colleen lay on the floor, pressing a cloth to her bleeding leg. Her breath came in short gasps, but she didn't cry out. Her glowing eyes stayed on James. She didn't trust the ship. But she trusted him. A blast rocked the rear of the ship. Warning lights flashed. James cursed under his breath and flipped two switches. The shields flickered online, weak but holding. "Just hang on," he shouted over the roar. "We're almost clear." Kayleen nodded, her lips pale. "Where are we going?" "Anywhere but here," James replied without looking back. The ship broke through the canopy and into the open sky. For a moment, they flew through clouds glowing with soft sunlight. Then the radar pinged. 2 enemy fighters locked on behind them. James pushed the thrusters to maximum. The old dropship groaned, metal creaking as it shot forward. The fighters followed. Kayleen pulled herself up to the co-pilot seat, holding her wound. "There are weapons," she said. "Manual." "I'll help. You sure?" James asked. "I am not helpless," she answered with a sharp breath. She tapped a code into the side panel. A hidden turret lowered from beneath the ship. Kayleen gripped the controls with shaking fingers. James banked left. A fighter fired, missing by inches. Kayleen fired back. The turret spit plasma. One of the enemy ships veered off, smoking. James smiled. "Nice shot." Kayleen didn't smile. "The next one won't miss." The second fighter looped above them, then dove down fast. Kayleen aimed again, this time steady. She fired. The beam hit dead center. The ship exploded in the sky. Debris rained down into the jungle below. Silence followed. Only the hum of the dropship filled the air. James exhaled slowly. Kayleen sagged in her seat, blood dripping from her leg again. James looked at her and then back to the radar. No more blips. For now they were safe. "We need a place to land," he said. "Somewhere we can treat that wound." "There's an outpost," Kayleen said quietly. "Not far from here. Hidden in the cliffs. My people once used it before the war." James nodded. "Show me." She guided him with soft directions. The ship coasted lower, following a narrow ravine lined with black stone and twisted trees. Finally, they saw an old structure buried in the rock face. Metal doors sealed tight, overgrown with vines. James hovered the ship and landed on a flat ledge. He helped Kayleen out, her arm over his shoulder. They stood before the massive door. "How do we open it?" he asked. She touched a panel on the wall. Her hand glowed faintly, and the door hissed open. Inside was dark, musty, but dry. Lights flickered on as they entered. Old tech hummed softly. James laid her down on a padded bench. She winced but didn't complain. "I'll get the med kit," he said. He found it in a wall compartment. "Alien tools. blue serum, thin bandages. He wasn't sure how it worked, but Kayleen showed him. Her voice was steady as she guided his hands. He cleaned the wound, sealed it with a light wand, and wrapped it tight. She watched him the entire time. When he finished, she whispered, "You've done more for me than anyone ever has." James looked into her eyes. "You saved me first," he said. "Now we're even." Kayleen smiled. It was faint but real. "I don't want to be even," she said. "I want to stay." James didn't answer right away. He looked around the room. It had beds, food packs, power. They could hide here, heal, plan, but he knew they couldn't stay forever. "Then we stay for now," he said. "Until we figure out the next step." She nodded and closed her eyes, resting at last. James stood watch at the door. Hours passed. He didn't sleep. His mind replayed the way she said, "I want to stay." Not as a command, not as a gift, but as a person making a choice. For the first time since the war began, James felt something warm inside his chest. Not victory, not pride, but something closer to hope. In the morning, she woke before him. She walked on her own, slower but stronger. She prepared food from the storage. He watched her move like someone discovering herself piece by piece. Not a slave, not a gift, but a survivor finding her shape. She sat beside him with a bowl and asked softly, "Is this what freedom feels like?" James took her hand and said, "It's the beginning of it." And outside, the sun touched the cliff with gold. The sun rose slow behind the cliffs, spreading soft gold across the rocks. Birds with crystal wings flew above the narrow valley. Inside the outpost, James sat cross-legged on the floor, repairing the dropship's cracked power core using parts from the storage room. Kayleen watched him from the entrance, her green fingers pressed against the cool metal wall. She wore a new robe she found inside a simple one, light gray, soft. No chains, no collar, no markings. Just cloth. She didn't say much, but her silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with thought, with watching, with learning. James glanced up and caught her eyes. She quickly looked away, but not fast enough to hide her smile. "Something funny?" he asked, standing up with a screwdriver in hand. "You look different when you work," she said. "Not like a warrior. More like someone who builds things." James wiped sweat from his brow. "I used to fix water systems back on Earth, before the war started." Kayleen tilted her head. "Why would someone who builds join a war?" James stared at the power cell, then said, "Because someone broke the piece." She understood. She didn't ask more. Instead, she stepped forward and helped him carry the repaired core to the ship. Their hands brushed. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the sound of static buzzed through the outpost speakers. A signal. Not human, not hers. Someone was scanning the valley. Kayleen froze. "It's the hunters." I recognized the pattern. "They're searching for something living, not metal." James checked the sensor panel. A sweep was coming every 10 minutes. They had less than one cycle before it locked onto the outpost. "Can we block it?" he asked. Kayleen pointed to the lower chamber. "There's an old cloaking emitter below. If it still works, we can mask the life signs, but it needs power. A lot of it." James grabbed the rebuilt core. "Let's power it up then." Together they climbed into the lower tunnels, deeper than before. The air smelled of old circuits and dust. Machines hummed with ancient power. At the end of the tunnel stood the emitter, a tall tower of metal rings and blinking lights. Kayleen touched it gently like greeting an old friend. "She was made by my great-grandmother," she said. "This was her gift to the free clans. Before we were enslaved." James handed her the core. "Let's bring her back." Kayleen smiled as she installed the core and typed commands into the terminal. Sparks flew, lights blinked. Then a soft pulse rolled through the chamber. The emitter hummed to life. Above, the scan signals vanished from the sensors. It worked. she whispered. They won't find us now, James exhaled in relief. He looked at her, her face lit by the emitter's glow. You're not what I expected when I saw you in chains, he said. I wasn't what I expected either, she replied. They sat together. In the glow, quiet, minutes passed. Then Colleen turned toward him and said, When I was a gift, I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. I wasn't allowed to touch unless commanded. But with you, I feel something strange. I feel safe. James didn't speak right away. He just looked at her and said, You're not mine. You never were. But I'll protect you like you were someone that matters. Tears formed in her eyes. She wiped them quickly. I don't know what to do with kindness, she said. But I want to learn. You will, he said. And you'll teach me things too. That night, they returned to the upper chambers. They ate side by side. They laughed softly. For the first time, Colleen told him stories, not from her time in chains, but from her childhood before the war. James listened. Every word felt like a piece of her soul returning. Later, she rested against his shoulder. Her head barely touched him, but it was her choice. She didn't ask permission. She simply trusted. And he let her stay there. I still dream of the cage, she said. But when I wake up beside you, the dreams fade. James gently placed a blanket over her shoulders. Then I'll keep sitting here so they stay gone. Outside, the wind howled across the cliffs. Inside, for once, there was peace. But peace doesn't last in a war zone. The next morning, a message reached the outpost, a broadcast. A reward had been placed on Kayleen's life. Not for return, but for silence. The ones who made her a gift wanted her erased. James crushed the receiver under his boot. We leave tonight, he said. Colleen didn't argue. I'll go wherever you go, she said, so they prepared for the dark. The dropship cut through the night sky like a ghost, its lights off, engines whispering low. James sat at the controls, eyes locked on the stars ahead. Kayleen sat beside him, strapped in with silent focus. Behind them, the outpost grew smaller. Swallowed by the cliffs and shadows, their destination wasn't marked on any map. It was a hidden moon, orbiting a forgotten gas giant, where no signals reached and no patrols passed. Kayleen had whispered its name like a memory, Tavari, a place once sacred to her people. As they entered orbit, thick clouds swirled below. Lightning flashed across the surface. James guided the ship through the storm. Rain struck the hull. The ship shook. Kayleen didn't blink. She kept her eyes on the swirling clouds. She had changed. Not just her clothes or her voice, but her presence. She no longer moved like a shadow. She stood taller, spoke clearer, chose her words like someone who knew the value of being heard. The ship landed in a deep canyon carved by wind and time. Trees with silver leaves grew along the edges. The air shimmered with strange particles. Colleen stepped out first. She breathed deep, eyes closed. Then she whispered, "This is where I was born." James followed her across the stone path. "You were born here?" She nodded. "Before they took us. My mother hid me here until they burned the village. I don't know if anyone survived." They reached the ruins of an old temple. Half buried in moss, its pillars still stood tall. Kayleen knelt before a broken statue, placing her hand on the base. A soft pulse of light responded. Ancient tech. Still alive beneath the stone. James looked around, impressed. "Is this place safe?" Kayleen answered with calm certainty. "It's protected by ancestral code. Only my blood can open its heart." She led him inside. Beneath the broken floor was a chamber glowing with green crystals. Shelves held old books, tools, and preserved food. A power unit hummed quietly. Kayleen activated the lights. The room came alive with gentle warmth. "This was my family's stronghold," she said. "We were healers, not fighters. But we knew how to hide." James placed his rifle against the wall. "You've been hiding." "Your strength too," he said. She turned to him. "I had to. When you are given as a gift, your power is taken. Now I choose to take it back." James watched her move through the chamber with steady purpose. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was remembering who she used to be. Later, they sat together near a glowing crystal, eating from warm bowls. Kayleen watched James closely. Then she asked something unexpected. "When you first saw me, did you see me as a weapon or a burden?" James shook his head. "I saw you as someone who needed help." That was enough. She looked down, silent for a moment. Then she said, "They used to tell us that humans were cruel. That if we ever met one, we'd be broken again. But you didn't break me. You made me feel real." James reached out and touched her hand gently. "You were always real. They just tried to erase it." Her fingers closed around his. The firelight reflected in her eyes. She leaned closer and whispered, "Then let me live for something new. Let me live with you." James didn't move away. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "For once, I want to choose who I stay beside." That night, they laid side by side in the chamber. Nothing was forced. Nothing was expected. Just warmth. Just trust. The wind outside sang through the canyon, but inside, there was peace. In the morning, James rose early. He worked on reinforcing the chamber entrance, adding metal supports and motion alarms. Kayleen joined him, learning the tools, handing him parts, laughing when things fell the wrong way. Her laughter filled the room like music. Suddenly, the warning alarm blinked red. A ship was approaching, fast. No signal ID, not friendly. James pulled up the scanner. One vessel. Medium class, armed. It's not a patrol. It's a bounty crew. Kayleen stepped beside him. "They came for me." James locked eyes with her. "They won't get you." She nodded and walked to the weapons shelf. She picked up the dagger that once tested James's truth. It glowed bright in her hand. "I won't run this time," she said together. They climbed out of the chamber and faced the storm-lit sky. The enemy ship hovered above the canyon, ramp opening. Armed figures dropped onto the rocks below. James raised his weapon. Kayleen stood beside him, holding her dagger with both hands. Her voice was strong when she spoke. "This time, I'm no one's gift. I am Kayleen of Tavari. Come take me if you dare." The wind howled louder. The canyon echoed with the sound of boots hitting stone. 5 figures moved forward in sleek armor, visors glowing red. Each held a plasma rifle aimed toward the temple. The bounty crew wasn't here to negotiate. They were here to finish a contract. James stood at the edge of the path, eyes locked on the lead soldier. His stance was steady. His rifle hummed with power. Beside him, Kayleen gripped her glowing dagger. Her hair whipped in the wind, her eyes sharp like crystal blades. "You don't have to do this," James said without raising his voice. The lead soldier stepped forward. His helmet speaker crackled. "We're not here for you, human. Step aside and you live. The girl is marked for termination by the council." Kayleen didn't flinch. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said. "I was given as property. I am not that anymore." The soldier raised his weapon. "She speaks without permission." That alone proves the sentence is correct. James didn't wait. He fired first. The shot slammed into the soldier's chest, throwing him back. The others scattered. Kayleen charged forward, moving faster than they expected. Her blade sliced through the air, striking one enemy across the arm. Sparks flew as metal clanged against stone. The firefight began. Plasma bolts lit the canyon, with flashes of blue and white. James rolled behind a boulder, returning fire with careful aim. Kayleen ducked and weaved between cover, her small form a blur of speed and precision. Her blade moved with purpose, not rage. One soldier tried to flank them. Kayleen saw it first. She launched herself off the rock wall and came down hard, driving the dagger into his armor joint. He screamed and dropped. James gave her cover as she retrieved the blade. 3 enemies remained. One took to higher ground. Another advanced toward the temple. James focused on the high ground. He aimed, waited, then squeezed the trigger. The shot hit center mass. The figure dropped like stone. The last 2 circled wide. Kayleen pressed her back to James's. "They're stalling," she said, calling for reinforcements. "We end this now," James replied. He surged forward, drawing fire. Kayleen used the distraction to close in. She leapt over a ledge and struck one in the leg. He collapsed with a cry. The final bounty hunter turned to shoot her, but James tackled him from behind. They crashed to the ground in a swirl of dust and light. The struggle was short. James pinned the enemy's weapon and disarmed him. Kayleen stood over them, her dagger at the ready. The soldier looked up at her, now helmetless. His face showed no fear, only cold obedience. "You are broken. Property," he spat. "Your death is mercy." Kayleen didn't blink. "Then I reject mercy." She didn't kill him. She turned away and walked back toward the ship. James tied the soldier's hands and dragged him into the canyon's edge. When he returned, Kayleen stood quietly, her blade sheathed. "I don't want to kill," she said. "But I won't let them take my voice again." James nodded. "You didn't just defend yourself. You defended your future." That night, they buried the dead far from the temple. No celebration followed. Only quiet and the sound of wind through the broken stone. Inside the chamber, Kayleen cleaned her blade. James sat beside her, wiping dirt from his hands. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It held truth. It held memory. "I never thought I'd survive this long," she said. "I thought my life would end in a cage." James looked at her. "But you're not in one anymore. You have a place now, a name. A choice." She turned to him, her voice low. "Then I choose to stay. Not because I must, but because I want to." He reached over and took her hand. Her fingers wrapped around his gently. They sat that way until the light dimmed, until the world outside felt distant and quiet. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The air smelled clean. The sky was blue. For the first time, Kayleen stepped outside the temple without looking over her shoulder. She stood tall, the wind in her hair, the sun on her face. Her chains were gone, her fear was fading. And beside her stood a human who had never treated her like anything but free. Together, they looked to the horizon. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The days on Tavari passed slowly, but they were no longer filled with fear. Kayleen and James spent their time rebuilding the temple, one stone at a time. Broken walls were patched. Doors were reinforced. Gardens were planted around the canyon. Edge Kayleen no longer wore the robe of a slave. She made her own garments, now like fabrics woven from the temple's old stock. Her hands, once bound in metal, now shaped tools and cared for seedlings. Every day, she grew stronger. James repaired the ship's communication panel, but he didn't send a message. The war was still out there, but for now, Tavari was quiet. The temple had become more than shelter. It had become something sacred. One morning, Kayleen stepped out before sunrise. She stood barefoot on the stone path, arms outstretched to the wind. Her eyes closed, her lips parted in ancient chant. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the canyon like breath on water. James watched her from the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He let her finish. When she turned, she smiled not with caution, but with peace. "It's the song of first light," she said. "My mother used to sing it." "I thought I forgot it." "You remembered," James replied. She walked to him and placed her palm against his chest. "Because you gave me time to heal." They shared breakfast near the fire pit. Then, without warning, a sharp pulse hit the air. The ground trembled. The crystals lining the canyon flickered. James ran to the sensor panel. A beacon had been activated from orbit. He turned to Kayleen. "Something's coming." Kayleen pressed her hand to the wall. Lights flared in the chamber below. An old star map projected upward. A single ship was marked, descending fast. But it wasn't a bounty hunter. It wasn't a council patrol. Its code was different. James studied the symbols. "It's not hostile. It's broadcasting medical clearance codes." Colleen's eyes widened. "That's from the old Tavari fleet. Before we fell. Before the war." The ship landed softly. Beyond the canyon, dust curled into the sky. James grabbed his rifle, but Colleen stopped him. "Let me go first. If it's real, they'll know me." He nodded, but followed close behind. As they reached the landing site, the ship's ramp lowered. From it stepped 3 figures. Their armor was not polished, not powerful, but ceremonial. Green and silver. The same colors etched in the temple walls. The lead figure removed her helmet. She was older, her skin pale green, her eyes lined with age and memory. She looked at Kayleen and fell to one knee. "Hi, daughter," she whispered. "We thought you were lost." Kayleen stood frozen. Her mouth moved, but no words came. James stepped forward and placed a hand on her back. She inhaled sharply, then spoke. "I am not lost. I survived." The woman stood. "We are the last of the Tavari seekers. We have searched for decades. The signal from your temple woke the old codes. It guided us home." Kayleen looked around. "Then this place will rise again, with truth. With freedom." The other 2 seekers bowed. James remained still, unsure where he belonged in this moment. But Kayleen turned and took his hand. She pulled him close and faced the newcomers. "This human saved me when I was nothing, when I was chained and silent. He didn't take. He didn't order. He listened. He waited. He healed. Without him, there would be no temple to return to." The elder bowed her head to James. "Then he is welcome among us. As protector, as friend, as kin." They returned to the temple as one group. The seekers brought knowledge, supplies, and memory. Old tech was reawakened. Stories were shared. Names remembered. Kayleen walked through the halls as something new, not a refugee, not a gift, but a leader. That night, they lit a fire in the main hall. Kayleen stood before the flame. Her voice rose in the language of her ancestors. She named the fallen. She honored the silent. Then she turned to James and called him by a name of her own choosing. "Vaerin," she said. "It means one who gives light to the broken." James accepted the name with a bowed head. He didn't understand the language fully, but he understood the feeling in her voice. Later, alone beneath the stars, Kayleen spoke softly. "I was once told I belonged to anyone who held my chain. Now I know I belong only where I am free." James looked at her, then said, "And I belong wherever you choose to walk." She reached out, placing his hand over her heart. "Then walk with me into tomorrow." The temple on Tavari bloomed with new life. Where once broken walls stood, now rose arches of polished stone and light crystals. The scent of growing herbs filled the inner courtyards. Laughter of Tavari children echoed through once empty halls. Colleen walked among her people like a spark had returned to her chest. Her robes now carried the markings of a speaker, one who guides through wisdom, not power. Her blade remained sheathed at her side, not for battle, but for remembrance. James worked with the builders, teaching old earth methods to reinforce the domes and irrigation. His hands were rough, his clothes plain, but to the Tavari, he was more than a human guest. He was the one who brought Kayleen home. One evening, the sky shimmered with aurora winds. Kayleen stood at the edge of the cliff, her hair flowing in the breeze. James joined her quietly. She looked up and said, My people are healing, but they still look to me for every answer. James nodded. Because you showed them how to rise again. Colleen turned toward him. But I am not the same girl who crawled through ash. I'm not the one who waited to be commanded. I am becoming someone else, and I don't know who that is yet. You're someone who chooses her path, James said. And I'll walk with you, even when you don't know where it leads. Her fingers found his. She squeezed gently. Will you stay, James, even now that I'm no longer broken? He smiled. That's why I stayed in the first place. A few days later, the Tavri Council was reformed. Elders who once hid in scattered caves returned to take their seats in the round hall. Kayleen stood before them, not as a servant or symbol, but as a voice. She told her story, not the polished version, the real one. She spoke of chains and silence, of fear and duty, of the human who looked at her not as a weapon or prize, but as a person. When she finished, the hall was silent. Then the oldest elder rose and said, "Let it be known. The age of gifts and silence is over. Let the Tavari choose again." That night, a new ritual was held. One that hadn't happened since before the war. Not a wedding. Not a coronation. A binding of trust. Kayleen and James stood beneath the twin moons. Each held a crystal shaped by their own hands. In Tavari tradition, the act of giving your shaped crystal meant offering a part of your truth. Kayleen offered hers first. This crystal holds the memory of a slave who forgot her name. You helped me remember it. So I offer you not what I was, but what I am becoming. James offered his crystal next. This holds the silence I carried in my heart after the war. You broke it with your voice. So I offer you not who I was, but who I want to be beside you. The crystals glowed and fused in their hands. From that day forward, they shared a room, a rhythm, and a role. Not lovers by demand, not leaders by title, but builders of something old and new. Together, they helped restore the Tavari learning halls. Together, they mapped safe zones and led supply missions. Together, they welcomed humans who fled war and Tavari who had lost their roots. The war outside still raged in distant systems. But Tavari stood untouched, hidden, guarded, alive. And in that peace, Kayleen thrived. She sang again. She danced again. She told children stories of starlight and bravery. James watched her with quiet joy, knowing the girl who once whispered, "Why haven't you touched me?" No longer needed to ask such questions. She was no longer property. She was no longer afraid. She was Kayleen of Tavari, and she was free. James, once a soldier left behind in a jungle, found more than survival. He found purpose in her voice, strength in her silence, and peace in her touch. They had come from different worlds, shaped by different pain. But together, they built something no war could burn. A home.